Hi, and welcome to another edition of Unstoppable Mindset. Today, we get to chat, from my perspective at least, all the way across the pond to Susan Popoola, who is not in the US, um, but with the speed of light, you'll never know it. How's that for an introduction? Susan, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. We're really glad you're here.
Thank you very much for having me, Michael.
Well, one of the things I know we're going to talk about a little bit later is the whole concept of, and I'm really excited to get to it, a mosaic world as you describe it. And I know you've written about it in some, but we'll get there. But let's start. I love to always start this way. Tell me about the early Susan, growing up and all that sort of stuff.
Gosh, that takes me back a few years,
Oh,
possibly
that's
a
okay.
yeah, possibly a few more years than you might have imagined from my voice, which actually people say sounds quite young. So I was born in England to Nigerian parents, and I spent my foundation years here in England. Up and then I what then and in my those years I spent my time very much in what I would describe as a very much white working class environment. And I say that because it has relevance to how I think and see the world. Because from there I moved we moved to was taken to Nigeria, and then went to secondary school in Nigeria, my first degree Nigeria. And contrary to my earlier, those foundation years, I was then in what you could call a rather middle class, more affluent area or environment with people.
Well, and you said that and you do sound like you're fairly young, but you opened the door. So how long ago was that? Or how old are you now? Or do you ever want to tell?
I know they do say you shouldn't ask a lady, but I just about made it into the 1960s, 19 November 1969 to be precise.
Okay.
So
1969, you
yeah,
said.
so I just about
Okay.
made it.
To
Um,
to the 70s. Okay. Well, that's fine. That is I am older than that from a time standpoint, although I don't feel it. And I think that we all can choose how well we want to deal with how we mature and grow older and all that. We can decide it's a good thing or not. Doesn't bother me a bit either way.
exactly. They do say they say you're as old as you feel. And that's an interesting one because you can look at that from the perspective of how you feel on the basis of how you behave. But you could also think about that from how healthy and fit you are as well.
So you mentioned you got your first degree in Nigeria, and what was that in? And I assume that's sort of equivalent to what we would call over here a bachelor's degree.
It is indeed. And it's a bachelor's social science degree in political science.
Ah, now why that specifically? What prompted you to go there?
It's an interesting one because when I was small, if you'd asked me what do you want to do for a living, I'd have told you I wanted to write. Um, and that's all I knew that I wanted to do. But I was told you don't write for a living, you do it as a hobby. So, a Nigerian family, you go to university. It's not a matter of whether you go or not, it's a matter of what you're going to study. And I had the leaning towards the arts, the social sciences, and so that's what I ended up doing.
Okay. So you got your bachelor's or first degree in social science and political science, and then did you go straight on to graduate school from there?
No, I worked for a number of years, and I guess a few years coming back to England, that was a few years later. That's when I did my first my I did a postgraduate in human resources management, and then at a later stage both while I was working, I did a master's in HR strategy and change, and I've done a few other little qualifications here and there along the way as well.
But clearly you were people oriented, since you seem to go off and look in the HR direction.
Yes, though it's an interesting thing, HR, because people do often go into HR because of people, but HR and HR, as I have experienced it in my involvement, has been very much on the strategic side. Whenever I've worked with an organization, the first thing I do is say, what's the business plan? What are you trying to achieve? And where do the people, what's the people strategy? Where do the people fit into that? How do they align? And so, yes, there is definitely a care for people. And I talk about myself, I title myself a human value optimization specialist. And that's because I believe in human value and how we make the most of it, both for the benefit of individuals and for people around them as well, whether we're talking about the workplace, education, or wider society.
What kind of reactions do you get when essentially you ask those questions? And what I'm hearing you say is that you get down to the questions of really how are people valued within the organizational structure, within the leadership environment, and so on. What kinds of reactions do you get? Because I'm sure that you get all sides or all sorts of different reactions and comments about that.
Well, I think there are two core reactions. There's the reaction which pertains to what people say. And I will say 95% of the time for organizations I've worked with or people, leaders that I speak to, it's always that, yes, we agree, we value people, they're important. Sometimes, on the other occasion, there's the response that talks about the importance of profit and how that is almost more important. So there's the response that is what people say, but then there is what I would say the more pertinent response is what people do and what their people say.
Yeah.
So I always love it when I have a conversation with a leader about the values of their organization and I bump into someone that works for them or speak to a team member and ask them what they think. I love it when there's an alignment between what the two say. But I'm also mindful that sometimes there is not that alignment. And that's the bit that is more important than what people actually say. And
Do you
that's
think,
when you have to find, sorry, that's when you have to find a way of holding them to account to what they actually say.
do you find overall that there is more of an alignment between people who are in leadership positions and those who work for them, or less of an alignment? Because I can imagine, and I've heard in talking with other people that oftentimes leaders think they're aligned and they're not, of
Yeah. And and it will, it really does vary.
course.
Um, I think the larger the organization it is, the larger the organization it is, the more difficult it is to find consistent alignment throughout. Because even if the very senior leadership is aligned, then the challenge is making sure that all the managers and the leaders throughout have that same alignment to bring things together and that there's that consistency. With smaller organizations, it's easier, but then the challenge is how to maintain that alignment, the ethos and the values as the organization develops and grows.
Yeah. And I guess I would say that's certainly not a surprise either. We have in larger organizations, there's probably a little bit less attention paid as quickly as there should be to communications. And so there tends to be more of a lack of alignment and a lack of understanding unless a leader truly understands the value of communicating and really getting people to buy into the process.
There's that, and it's also the bit about who you recruit into your leadership team. A number of years back, I worked with an organization from the startup stage to it growing over the years. And we were very specific as a board in in defining what the ethos and the values of the organization were to be, what it was going to be like. And we initially recruited the senior leadership team in alignment with that. But where I will be honest and say where we made the mistake is not ensuring that the values came first when it came to recruiting leaders and team members further down the line.
Yeah.
So the communication is key, but communication specifically about what the organization is about, what it stands for.
So I assume that you worked for various companies in their HR world in some way.
In the HR world and beyond, I mean, I'm pleased to say that there was a time. So I've worked in organizations cross-sector, from private sector organizations to public bodies to charities, NGOs. So I've worked across board to larger organizations and smaller organizations. But I'm pleased to say that in between, I have taken on other roles. So for instance, I worked in investor relations for a year, and some other operational positions. And investor relations specifically was great for me because that meant that I had so investor relations is a communications role. You could
Right.
say a PR role, but PR communications to investors, both current and potential investors. So I learned to be able to understand an organization at all levels, to be able to understand the story, what's going on, and be able to position that story.
Yeah, investor relations is an interesting challenge because then you've got also on the other side the brokers and having to communicate with them
Yeah.
can also be a challenge because they've got their own mindsets and they're very profit oriented. But sometimes I'm sure that you have to deal with getting them to understand there's more to it than just creating a profit. You've got to create understanding and you've got to be able to communicate with those you want to have trust you.
You have, and I think increasingly, especially with younger generations, they want to be paid well. Why not? But there are other things that are important to them as well. And I think it's always been the case through generations. But the thing is, information is more readily available to them and to us as a whole than it used to be. So it's easier for us to see the bigger picture of things and question things and say, yes, money, profit is important, but not just that. So I was at an event where they were sharing, okay, these are the top 50 companies. And when I look closer, it was purely on the basis of finance. So I challenge that doesn't make them the top countries, the top companies just because they are making a lot of money.
Yeah, it all comes down to what do you define as a top company? Is it money? Is it teamwork? Is it how employees rank you? I mean, there's so many
Yeah.
options.
Well, I'm very big, as my work has evolved, very much have a focus on working with leaders to create harmony, impact, and at a more personal level for them, legacy. And so for me, if I'm thinking of a top company, I'd be thinking about the harmony that exists within,
Hmm.
and that's how the relationships and how people work with each other. Whether you're talking about gender, race, multiculturalism, what have you, social, economics, or any features, or just how people work together. So that harmonious environment for me helps to make you a top company, together with the impact that you're having. Profit is important as well, because if you're a business, that is still part of what you're about. But what's the impact that you're having, and how do people feel and interact within?
Now, today you own your own business. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. So now more than working for other companies as an employee, you own your own business and they bring you on board to deal with various issues in terms of HR and leadership and communications and so on, I presume.
That is correct, yes.
So, what is human value optimization? That's something you've referred to.
So human value optimization. So I came to human value optimization with a recognition that there's the work that I do HR within organizations, there's work I do with wider community and other things. And I just thought, with all the things that I do, what is it really about? And what is most important to me? We spoke about what's important to organizations, what is most important to me that informs everything that I do. It's people, it's the value that they have, and how we recognize and realize that. And that goes back to when I was small, where my mum always told me that everyone is of importance. It doesn't matter who they are, the person cleaning the office or the person managing the office. Everyone's adding something to whatever environment they're in. And so for me, in all that I'm doing, it's really, how do we optimize that? And that is the two parts to it. It's one, that as individuals, people recognize the value that they have to offer, but also that the people around them, in the workspace, in community, in education, also recognize the value that people bring. And when you have an individual that recognizes their value, but they're not appreciated, they don't fully realize their value. On the other hand, if people think a person is great, but that person doesn't see the value in themselves, again, they're limited. But when both come together, then you get the optimal result. And I will say also the most profitable result for both the individual, the organization they are working for, or whatever environment they're in.
And I think that's an extremely important and valuable point is that it really does require both people to come to the same realization of the value of people and of an individual. What do you do when you find that there is a misalignment? Either the employee doesn't feel they're valued, or the employer just plain isn't valuing the skills and the knowledge that somebody brings. How do you deal with that?
I mean, so I guess there are two parts to that. With the individual, it's really working with them, working through them, to help them to see what they do, what they bring. So what is the work that they actually do? Because many of us are very good at seeing what we do in the just. I just do this. I only do this. So it's actually been able working with them to see these are all the different things you do. Almost list those things out with those people, and getting them to see the impact that those things have, the value that those bring, and critically how it fits into the wider organization. So as I said, mentioned earlier on, it doesn't matter whether you're the person cleaning the office or managing the office. It's important. It all fits into the business objectives. The administrator who is I've used the word, just photocopying documents, typing or doing whatever the case may be. That's an important part. If those things are not done, then the organization doesn't function fully. So it's enabling that individual to see it. But on the other side, it's also making the organization leadership aware of the importance of the roles that individuals play and how it all adds together to enable them to be successful.
And your success is based on how well you're able to bring both sides of that into alignment.
To some extent, yes. And the reason why I say to some extent is there's something about doing your best. Um, I gravitate towards leaders who say that they really do want to have an impact, they really do value people. But then you can only go as far as they want and are willing to go. And so I don't hold myself responsible for their actions. I hold myself responsible for guiding them and giving them as much support as I can.
But yeah, then the hope is that they recognize the value of that and will finish the job of aligning.
Yes, and I mean, and I always start off with as honest a possible conversation as I can, which is very much about what is it that you want? I mean, what do you really want? What are you trying to achieve? And what do you believe? What do you believe is standing in the way? What do you believe needs to be done? Then being able to hold a mirror, and it's could be over time to create awareness of what the challenges may be. Cross-checking, is this really what you want to do? And if they say they do, then it's working through. And I will do my uttermost to support them, but I will also hold them to account. And I have done that on occasion with leaders whereby I've really stood firm to say, this is what you said, and what you're doing doesn't align, and therefore you have to behave differently, you have to do differently. And on occasion, I've actually thought I would be chucked out of the door, but that's never happened.
One of my favorite books is a little short book called The Five Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. And it talks a lot about, of course, the whole concept of teamwork and trust, but it really does say that in well-functioning teams, everyone can hold each other to account when commitments are made. And if the team is functioning well, they understand that what is happening is not that someone has a grudge or someone is trying to um, best someone else, but rather they're just doing what the team should do, which is holding people to account, which is a very important thing to do.
Yeah, and in a way that goes back to when I talk about harmony, um, and specifically with what you're saying, workplace harmony. I think it's a journey to get there because for someone to try to hold you to account, you have to have an understanding, a joint understanding of what you're all working towards in the first, so that's a starting point. You have to have that joint understanding. You have to have some knowledge of each other so that there is a trust. You and that comes with building a relationship. So there's a trust that when you're given that feedback, you know where it's coming from, and you know the why of it. And then I think the third component of that for me is how and when you do that. So you still, even though they're the best of intentions and all, I think I'm still one that believes in giving feedback, giving constructive feedback, but giving it um making it constructive and being sensitive in the process.
Hmm. Well, it is an important thing to deal with, no doubt about it. Tell me about this whole concept of a mosaic world that you talk about. What is it, and what what do we need to do to help maybe create more of it? And what are you doing to create more of a mosaic world?
Okay. Um, I
A lot of
started,
questions there.
there are a lot of questions, and so I'm pausing for a second to say, where do I start? And I think to contextualize it, I started thinking of a mosaic world at the time that I wrote my second book, which is Consequences Diverse to Mosaic Britain. And the reason why I wrote the book was because this was about 12 years back, and there were people that I guess that you would describe as that were seen as nationalist, who were concerned and complaining about immigration, and people coming in, people taking jobs and everything else along those lines. And there was the label of them being racist. And I said to myself, are they all racist? Some definitely were, but are they all racist? Well, were there deeper issues at play? And this scenario that I'm setting out could apply to parts in America, anywhere across the world. So are they all racist against other people, or are there deeper issues? And when I looked, you recognize how there are people that felt left behind. And I'm sure you can identify with that from the States, that there are people that have over time felt that they've been left behind. And they see or saw the immigrant as the cause of their problem. But my analysis was, yes, these people are faced with real issues that aren't being addressed. But at the same time, it's not the immigrant that is causing the problem, and the immigrant is here as a consequence of history. And the key is how we live and work together. Because from that perspective, for me, Britain, as is almost anywhere in the world, diverse by nature. And the key is, how do we come together to be something more effective, something cohesive? And that's when I started thinking of the mosaic Britain, and I would say therefore and thereafter a mosaic world. And for me, a mosaic world is, if you think of a piece of artwork, a mosaic piece of artwork, you see it's got all the different colors. And I'm using the word see. I hope you don't mind me using the word see.
Absolutely not.
But it has all the different colors, um, and all the different shapes and sizes. And all of those pieces come together to create something beautiful. But they only stick together if there's something that binds them together. And for me, thinking of that as a workplace, a school, a community, a country, the world at large, those pieces that the thing that binds us together, like glue, are the things we have in common at a very basic level. You could speak of our common humanity. But even if that is not enough, then you'd begin to think of the things we have in common, the values that we share, the fact that we all typically love our children, and the things that we do. We all want to work hard and have good outcomes, but not just the things, but it's not just the things we have in common, our purpose, our vision, but it's also the things that make us curious about each other, that draw us towards each other. So all of those things come create a mosaic. And so then the third question, I guess, is what am I doing? I think in my work, whereby my work and my interactions generally, where I see people, I'm curious about them. I want to know who they are, what they have to offer, how do we value them? How do we include and engage with them and bring out the best in them and learn from them? And drawing them all in and getting different people. So I do work within organizations and schools, which is where I talk about drawing up mosaic maps and drawing up relationships and getting people to see the value that each brings and how they all come together. And just from a simple exercise, you find that people go away with a better awareness of people that they may have worked with for years. And so, in very broad terms, that's part of how I do it and how I encourage other people to do so.
And you describe it in a in a visual sense, which is fine. But I would also say that the mosaic is just as important when you're dealing with auditory and other kinds of things that are non-visual. It's all part of the same thing. And it gets back to the whole subject of diversity. We talk a lot about diversity, but we see in the world so many times when it really comes down to it, people don't tend to want to tolerate those who are different than they are. How do we deal with that?
I, we need to get, I mean, starting with like you and I guess to some extent that's what we're doing because in some ways we are different. As I said, we have commonalities but differences. But we need to take the time to get to know other people, people that are typically othered. We need to take the time to understand who they are and what motivates them. What, so it's what I did in the book that I just described. So the people that were seen as racist, instead of just saying, yep, that's what they are and condemning them, it's taking the time to understand them. Who are they? What motivates them? What do they want from life? And then if you've engaged people at the level of their humanity, even if outwardly you might see them as hateful, when you engage with them and you start a conversation and you see them, there's not always the case, but there's a probability or at least a possibility that they'll begin to see you.
But again, that I'm just trying to puzzle through this. That takes time. And everyone says that we just never have enough time to do a lot of things that we should do. So, how do we recondition society to recognize the value in looking at people for who they are, not what they look like or what they sound like or anything like that, but really who they are?
I mean, the first thing I say is when you say we don't have time, I would say we don't have time not to, because for a lot of societies, things have become so divisive.
Yeah.
It's it's ugly. It's not progressive, and I'm not sure that anyone, whatever side they may see themselves on, I'm not sure that anyone is really happy with that. And it's only going to get worse if we continue with the same trajectory of just looking at people that are different or say things we dislike, and at times things that are outrightly wrong. So I'm not denying that. But if we continue on the path that we're in, we self-destruct. I mean, so for me, that's the first thing. We don't have time not to. And there's a saying, and I'm paraphrasing, that a friendship, a new friend is just a smile away. It is through conversations and stories that you get to know each other people, whether that's reading a book, listening to a podcast, sometimes there's a message in a song, sometimes it's the person that you meet at a bus stop and you talk to. So there's something about being curious about people rather than automatically condemning people for what is wrong and sometimes unquestionably wrong, but taking the time to understand their why and get under the skin of things.
Yeah.
And I,
Yeah.
if you do it once or twice with one or two people, then if you're anything like me, then it becomes habit.
And that's the point, right? It's really changing our mindset and changing our habits when we start to recognize maybe we're cutting people out, and uh, hopefully we see maybe there's more to that person than meets the eye. It is changing a habit. It is changing a mindset.
Yeah.
It is also about wanting to change or deciding I'm open to exploring something different.
Yeah, and for me as well, I mean, because it would be easy for people to think I'm being soft. I'm far from it. Anyone that knows me and knows me well knows that I am actually very firm. But for me, even if so that person might be wrong, but if you stand across a room and you shout at a person and tell them you're wrong, you're an idiot, or what have you, that person's not going to engage. The
No.
person's going to tune out. Um, Possibly the person might freeze. The person might respond by shouting back their own abuse or what have you, or just they're so frozen. So even if there's truth in what's being said, they can't hear. So the key, therefore, is what do you do to engage such a person? You take the time to ask questions. I will use the word gently ask questions to understand. And that's understanding things that might not even be right. And it's not saying that that makes them right. But then if you can understand a person's standpoint, you've engaged with them, they feel seen, they're more likely to listen. You're better able to correct or increase a person's awareness of where they might be wrong, and they're more likely to engage with it.
Mhm. Well, and of course, that's always something that is important. If you alienate someone and if you just decide they're useless, then they will be to you, even though they may not be useless at all. Uh, And it's each side has to take part in engaging to have a discussion. And conversation is so important. We're losing that art, I think, to a degree today.
Yeah, and it goes back to when you asked me about human value optimization. That's another example of it. It's it's getting to it's seeing that person, it's humanizing that person, so that person can be human towards us.
Right. You've written 3 books. Why don't, if you would, tell us a little bit about each of those books.
Okay, so I've already spoken a bit about the second one. That's Consequences Diverse to Mosaic Britain. And as I said, in many ways, that could just as well be Consequences Diverse to Mosaic America or so many other places in the world. But then my first book is Touching the Heart of Milton Keynes, A Social Perspective. And that is based on, I live in Milton Keynes, and it's seen as very, should I say, middle England, where everyone's doing okay. It's a new town, but it's got its challenges and all. And as a new town, people often focus very much on the structures. But I wanted to talk about the people and what it's like for all different people. And again, it's how we all seeing different people and how we ultimately live, work more effectively together for the benefit of all. And so that's touching the heart of Milton Keynes, a social perspective. And then my third, most recent book is Male Perspectives on the Value of Women at Work. And while the first two are social perspectives, and the third one is more work related, you can still see there's a theme of being able to see others. So male perspectives on the value of women at work is very much the example of being able to look at someone differently or other people. And that came about because I was mindful through the years that the workplace designed around men, women have been trying to make progress within that environment for years. They're great programs, they're great initiatives, there a lot that women have said about what needs to be done, what they need, and what have you. But women's progress doesn't align. Women are very capable, just as capable as men. I wouldn't say more capable, I wouldn't say less capable. And so I thought what is missing in the dialogue or the interactions is the voice of men. And so for that third book, I decided to speak to a number of different men to understand from their perspective what unique value do they believe women bring into the workspace. How do men and women typically navigate differently that has a negative impact on women, and what do they believe needs to be done to enable better progression and, dare I say again, better gender harmony at work?
What was the biggest surprise for you about speaking to men concerning the value of women at work?
Very few of them felt that they'd ever been asked. And it's not just asked about the value of women, but asked about women. They felt that their opinion has never been sought. They've typically been told this is what you do wrong, and this is what needs to be done. This is what I need, and this is what needs to be done. But their opinions hadn't been sought, and they were so pleased, typically pleased to share. They were sensitive at giving advice, but they were very happy to be able to input into the conversation. And you asked what was the standout thing, but I'll add something else. The other thing that stood me out is that actually a lot of them have very limited understanding of the challenges that women are actually faced with.
Okay, can you tell me a little bit more about that?
I'll give you an example. So, I mean, I'll give to one of the men, one of the things he said is, well, as men are very simple. And this is his perspective, but men are simple, easy to understand, very straightforward, but women are much more complex. And you'd probably have heard jokes about you can describe a man on one page and women, you'd need a whole book. But put that aside, the key is from his perspective and from some of the things that was said, you can tell that there's a limited understanding of men. And that goes, and there is that reality. If you here in the UK, we've in recent years started talking quite a bit about menopause, something that wasn't spoken about before. It's something that directly impacts a significant number of women to varying degrees, but it doesn't affect men directly. But until we started having those conversations, most men had no understanding of the impact or why women, they might even have a partner who might start acting differently at a certain time. So that's an example, and that impacts women at a personal level, and it also affects them in the workplace as well.
Do you find that there are some men who would say, well, but the very fact that they have to go through all that really means that they're not going to be as helpful at work because they've got too many challenges to go through?
Not the men that I spoke to, because I took more of an appreciative inquiry approach. So speaking to people that I could learn more from rather than not. And so rather than there being the men that spoke of, okay, the challenges that women are faced with that might mean that they shouldn't be in the workplace, there were the men that spoke of the fact that actually they've worked with women or employed women who in the early years of their career may have taken time off to on for maternity leave, had children, taken time a fair amount of time out, but come back to the workplace, and that they're loyal. That is one of
Yeah.
the things that came up a few times, the loyalty of women, and we're generalizing
Yeah.
that they're more likely to stay with the same workplace longer term, while men are more likely to move from different one organization to another. So they spoke of the value that if you support a woman through that stage, then you're likely to have an employee that is going to be with you and supporting your organization long term.
Yeah. And I think, and the reason I asked the question is all about I can see and have heard men say those kinds of things. And it really usually indicates to me a significant lack of understanding about the reality that we all have needs and differences. Um, I think more men are starting to recognize a little bit the value of taking time when a new child is born to take some leave and help dealing with that child as well. But I face it a lot as a person who is blind when I hear people talking about persons with disabilities. Well, they've got too many problems. It'll be too expensive to bring them in. Insurance will go up, or we have to buy this equipment and we don't have to buy that equipment for other people. And so many excuses, and they are excuses because the reality is insurance won't go up. The reality is that when you talk about buying equipment to give somebody the ability to do a job or the opportunity to do a job, we're already buying other equipment for people to do the job. I mean, we provide electric lights so that you can walk down a hall, which isn't something that I need to worry about. But the bottom line is that we provide electricity to provide electric lights, or we provide computer monitors, and we hiccup about maybe spending a couple $100 for a screen reader so a blind person can have a job, even though we have no problem spending money providing a computer monitor. A lot of it really is excuses rather than thinking it through.
And yeah, I know I would agree. I mean, and I would add, typically, and you can correct me if you think otherwise, if a person has a disability in one area, they often have heightened abilities in other areas. Um,
Only if they train them. It's not an automatic process, which a lot of people think it is. It's not. So
I'm
hearing,
not speaking, so I'm not speaking from the workplace. I'm speaking
no,
more generally
no, I am
because,
too.
okay,
It's not heightened just because. In other words, a blind person doesn't hear better simply because they don't see. You still have
exactly.
to train the hearing. You
Yeah,
still have to train yourself to be able to do that. So that's what I'm saying is that
yeah.
it's not really heightened. It's if it appears so, it's because we've learned to use our hearing more than a lot of people do.
So I think we're more or less saying the same way. I'm not saying it's. I might not have been clear, but I'm not saying it's by nature, but it's developed. So
It
I
is
take that
correct.
on board. So I take
Correct.
that on board. So that it's developed. So that's this. What might not be there? There's something else there that others might not have. But there's also the thing that where you make adjustments or you bring something new in for the sake of one person, that often benefits the wider team.
Sure.
I There's an example that I use in relation to deaf people. Um, People often, I remember going to a restaurant with a group of young deaf people, and I was specifically was talking to a young guy who could lip read very well and engage. But what struck me is though while I'd had a full conversation with him, when a waiter came across, the waiter didn't look at any of the young people. They automatically looked at the other people to say, what do they
What
want?
do they want? Right.
What do they want? But the reality is, if they had looked at the young people for the most part, maybe not all of them, but for most of them, if they, which goes back to your earlier point, if they had looked at them and spoken to them, they could have had a conversation with them. And I've always said that I would actually like to use to engage with deaf people in a program to help people to improve their communication. Because the bit that the waiters weren't doing was they weren't looking at the people.
Hmm.
And that's the bit you should do with everyone. So I think we can learn to better engage with people through deaf people.
We unfortunately all too often learn to fear people who are different than we, or we learn to fear difference. And I think that starts at an early age. Um, I oftentimes will be somewhere and a child will want to come up and pet my dog. And I don't want a child to come up and pet my dog. I do want them to ask, and then they can pet the dog. But I hear the mother go, "Oh, that dog might bite," or that you don't want to go talk to that man. Don't embarrass that man. And so many different things. We teach it so collectively in society, which is unfortunate too. We teach the fear of difference.
Yeah. I mean, I talk about being a why child because if you think of that child that is told not to, the child might probably say, why not? Why? And I don't know why, but for a 4-year-old, the question that they're most inclined to ask is why.
Yeah,
But in line with what you said, we tend to knock that out of them.
yeah.
But I think we shouldn't. We should let them ask the why and let them explore. Um, Teach them how, if anything, teach them how to ask why with sensitivity. So the child that wants to come and pet your dog, rather than the parent saying, don't, tell the child, okay, you want to pet the dog.
Go
Ask
ask.
them, can I pet your dog, please?
Sure. And that's the point, right? But we don't encourage curiosity nearly as much as we should, and that's unfortunate. What do you think is the biggest barrier to inclusion?
we've just been talking about it.
Yeah.
It's the othering people, it's the lack of, it's the fear to engage. So it's not seeing other people. It's that basically othering of people. And the ability to be able, and so if we could just take the time to see other people, and if we could all be that more gracious as well, knowing that sometimes people will get it wrong. So allow for people to get it wrong, correct them, but correct them with a degree of gentleness rather than in a harsh way, which makes them run away as if they were bitten by the dog and never come back.
Yeah. Rather than correcting, understanding is what we all ought to provide a lot more than we do. And um, I hope over time people will see that, and maybe this podcast will help, which is why we're having it, of course.
I hope so. I mean, because I use I am a visual thinker, so when I talk about a mosaic world, I do think of it in very visual terms.
But that's
But
what you're used to.
yeah, but with whatever senses apply to people, if you can imagine a world in which everyone's valued, in a world with the richness whereby you talk to people and there's always something new to learn from them, and there's something positive and they're adding to us and we're adding to them. Um, I might say it as if it's a dream, but it's not something insurmountable. We can start in small communities, we can start in teams within organizations, to whole organizations, to towns, to schools, to what have you. It's not an insurmountable thing for us to all work towards.
Hmm. You grew up in a family, and you value clearly the whole concept of what family brings to each of us. Why are you so interested in foster children?
Oh, well, you said I grew up in a family that, I mean, so there are two parts to it. So if you remember when we started talking, I mentioned that I grew up, my foundation years were in a white working class area. I was actually what they call private fostered when I was small. So that's an arrangement made with my parents. I guess if my parents were in Nigeria, they would have had the extended family support. But being in England, as many Nigerians were 50s, 60s, 70s studying, they didn't have that support network around them while they were trying to study and work, and sometimes didn't always have the accommodation and other factors come to play. So I spent my foundation years um, with what they call private fostering, an arrangement made with my parents. And so that to some extent informs me, especially as through the years, eh, as an adult, I came across other people that were either private fostered, one or two very good friends with that experience, became having the conversations, became aware of the challenges. Now, I was quite fortunate. I was in I was in a loving, caring environment as a small child. I had a family in my older years. So I always had that. But becoming aware of the challenges, the displacement, the trauma that comes for a number of young people who have been foster cared, and the fact that there's what they call the cliff, whereby even if sometimes you will have been in foster care and you'll be fought with foster parents that say that they are parents for life. And so to the outside world, they wouldn't know that you're not with your birth parents. But for others, you get to that age of, on average, 18, whereby a lot of the support that you had, and might not have had a lot of support in the first instance, but a lot of that support is withdrawn, and you therefore find yourself in a place as an 18-year-old whereby, yes, you can drink and you can drive, but you're making crucial decisions about life and you're largely on your own. And I don't think it should be that way. And so the work I do in that space is very much either directly or through others, supporting such young people to better understand who they are, what they want, and take steps towards achieving it. And with that, the ultimate vision is every foster child should know that they're loved, valued, and have the support that they need to be the best that they want to be.
And it doesn't get any better than that.
No, and it's not asking for too much.
No, not at all. And I think it is something that we all are obligated to help and should be
Yeah.
obligated to help children.
And that's one of the reasons why, so they're the programs that we've run over time. Then there's what we've we've developed. It has a UK focus at the moment, but building out what I call the care experience village, because while in the States we use the broad term of let me use the term fostering. We use foster care in some circumstances, but we also use the wider term of care, a young person being in care. So a young person who's a care leave or care experienced. So we've got what I call the care experience village, which has some information to help people better understand what the care experience is. And so they have a better empathy, some resources as well. So if they meet someone who's been in foster care, that they're better able to both engage with and support them.
So, in your business, do you work with people just in the UK, or because we have a virtual world, you can work with people elsewhere as well?
Yeah, I work with people globally. I've worked a lot with you in the UK, with Europe, the States, parts of Africa and the Middle East as well. So I
Right.
work wherever there are good organizations and leaders who really want to have a positive impact.
If people want to reach out to you and maybe make contact and see how you can work with them and assist them in what they do, how do they do that? And what's the name of your business and how would they reach out?
So they could simply go to LinkedIn and find Susan Popoola, Popoola spelled Popoola. Alternatively, they could go to Mosaic World, all one word, .live, which is LIVE.
And there are ways to contact you through Mosaic World then when they go to that
Yeah,
site.
there are indeed. What Mosaic World will do is it will give you a showcase into the different areas from the publications to the consultancy work to talks and to the work with young people.
Well, great. Well, I want to thank you for spending all of this time with us and describing what you do and describing your thoughts. I think that the insights are extremely valuable and helpful, and I hope people will take it to heart and that they will reach out and engage with you. And clearly, you're helping to enhance understanding, and I trust that people will recognize that and uh, will work better to understand, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure. And yes, I'd love for people to get in touch. It will be great. The more people are engaged, the more we can do for the benefit of all.
Well, I want to thank you again for being here, and I want to thank you all for listening to us today. Susan's been a wonderful conversationalist, and I've enjoyed it and I've learned a lot, and I hope all of you have as well. I'd love to hear from you. You are welcome to email me at michaelhi@accessibe.com. So that's michaelhi at accessibe.com. Or go to visit our podcast page, www.michaelhinkson.com/podcast. And Michael Hinkson is spelled Michaelhingson. So wherever you're listening, I do hope and really would appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star rating on our podcast and that you will tell others about us. And for you, Susan, and for everyone, including speaking of and telling others about us, if you know of anyone who ought to be a guest, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to have an introduction to anyone who wants to be a guest on Unstoppable Mindset. Um, you can tell that we have a nice, easy, flowing conversation, and that's what it's all about. So we'd love to have anyone on who wants to come, because I believe everyone has stories to tell. So please give us a rating. We value that very highly. And Susan, once more, I want to thank you for being here with us.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for all that you do. Because I've had an amazing conversation with you, and I've listened to some of the other conversations you have, and you're doing some great work. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure. And again, thank you for being here. And I think we had a lot of fun, don't you?
I do indeed.